Controversial plans by the Welsh Government to introduce a compulsory COVID pass for nightclubs and big sporting events will begin tomorrow after the Senedd backed the scheme by the narrowest of margins. The voting on the COVID pass was criticised as one Conservative member was unable to vote due to a problem with his Zoom link. The Labour-led government argue that the pass is needed to drive down rates of COVID-19 infection, especially among the young. They claim that the scheme would ease pressure on the NHS and help keep premises such as clubs open this winter. They accused those who opposed it of gross irresponsibility. However, Russell George, the Welsh Conservative Shadow Health Minister, argued that introducing a vaccine passport would lead to Wales becoming a checkpoint society. The Liberal Democrat, Jane Dodds, said she believed COVID passports were an infringement on freedom and liberty. The Nighttime Industries Association, which represents 100 venues in Wales, said the passes represented a significant barrier for its operations. It argued that operators could not afford the extra resources and logistical challenges that a COVID pass would create. So are vaccine passports inevitable for the rest of the country? Are they an unwelcome assault on our civil liberties, or the silver bullet that will get us back to normal life? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome Cardiff councillor Joel Williams, senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School, a good friend of this show, Dr. David Strain, and another pal of mine, an old friend, Alan Miller, hospitality entrepreneur and co-founder of the campaign group Open for All, which opposes vaccine passports. Alan Miller, let me start with you. Why do the hospitality industry reject the idea of vaccine passports?
For many reasons. One, they're utterly discriminatory. We know that also they're unscientific. They're actually anti-scientific. It will impose enormous additional logistical and cost measures on those venues. But there's a question about our communities and across our countries, what it actually means to insist that you then have to ask customers to see the most intimate of their health details. And we should never have to do that. It's not something that was ever agreed that there would be an exchange about. And actually, in Wales, we've seen a situation where the vote would have been a tie had it not been for a technical hitch. You can't quite make this situation up for something that will change the whole way that we organise ourselves and that we will be living in as a consequence of this. So it's something that is unnecessary. It's illogical. You know, obviously you can be vaccinated and still transmit. You could be unvaccinated and have had COVID and have high immunity. We now have between 94 and 96% immunity according to the ONS and Public Health England. And it really is a situation where we should never be asking citizens to show their papers to participate in society.
David Strain, the vaccine considered to be very effective at reducing hospitalisations and severe illness, but it doesn't stop you getting COVID again. As Alan mentioned, it doesn't stop you transmitting it, which renders the idea of vaccine passports completely defunct.
I have to actually agree. I remember last time we met Alan on here and we were very much in disagreement. But tonight I actually agree with him entirely. The vaccine passport does not fix the problem that we need to address. We would like as many people as possible to be vaccinated. But in the UK, we should not mandate things. And this is discriminatory. It's taking people and actually mandating that they do something in order to enjoy the liberties that we hold dear to our heart. The vaccine doesn't stop you spreading it. It doesn't guarantee that you won't catch it. It means that you won't go to hospital, you won't end up very, very poorly, but it doesn't guarantee you won't catch it. It only reduces your risk of long COVID by about 50%. And actually, the alternative of this, doing a lateral flow test within 48 hours, is just not worthwhile. The lateral flow test is only positive from 4 to 8 days. That means if you were in contact with COVID 3 days ago, you would test negative today, but be able to go clubbing tomorrow. I think the way that it's been set up is wrong. And I think the best thing to do with the resources that are putting into that is encourage more of the 20 to 25-year-olds that are still unvaccinated to actually give them the positive messages about how this will benefit them. And actually, for many, mandating something does more to undermine the recognition that vaccine is in their own health.
Delighted to welcome Cardiff councillor Joel Williams to the show as well. Joel, can you explain the circumstances around which this vote in the Senedd actually happened?
Well, it was quite extraordinary, Mark. Thank you for inviting me on. It's great to be here with GB News and their viewers. It was quite extraordinary. The vote would not have gone through if our Conservative member were able to cast his vote to vote down these discriminatory medical passports. So in Wales from tomorrow, for the first time, you will be required to provide your personal and private medical information to a complete stranger in order to enjoy certain freedoms, such as going to a nightclub, sports ground or concerts. Now, Mark, my view is quite clear. The state should not have the power to impose such measures. Medical passports represent an infringement on our personal liberty and set a dangerous precedent for the use of our personal and private medical data.
Why, therefore, is the leader of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, still considering COVID passports for England, Joel?
Well, I can't speak for the Prime Minister. I'm a proud Conservative, but if that means that I'm going to agree with everything...
He is your leader.
Well, I respect our leader, but I will not agree with my leader on everything, and I'm certainly not intending to be a clone as a politician. Medical passports will not drive down COVID transmission in any purposeful way. The science tells us if you've had 2 jabs, you can still contract COVID and you can still pass it on. So to apply this oppressive policy only to those who haven't had the vaccine shows how irrational the Welsh Labour government is. And I really, sincerely hope that the Prime Minister does not introduce them in England.
David Strain, do you think the vaccine passports are inevitable for the rest of the country?
I don't actually. They were originally supposed to be coming in back at the end of August, then again in September. But it keeps coming back to this: where is the right place to be investing our time, our energy and our efforts going forward? I agree that the 18 to 25-year-olds are at risk of COVID. They should be vaccinated. But within the UK, we offer the freedom, we have the liberties to choose not to be vaccinated, to choose to put yourself at risk. And at the moment, because the vast majority of the vulnerable adults, the vast majority of people who are at most risk of catching COVID and ending up in hospital dying are not only already vaccinated, but being offered their booster vaccines, I do think that the Prime Minister, and this is really going to pain me to say it, I do think the Prime Minister was right to abandon plans to go with the COVID passports, because actually spending our energy getting the population that haven't been vaccinated yet to get it, this is not going to be a way forward. And actually mandating the vaccine, actually saying you must do that to join in society, is in many ways going to push people who are cautious, push people who are hesitant to say, well, if the governments tell me I've got to do it, then I don't want it.
But David, why this enthusiasm for getting the young vaccinated? We know that statistically they face very little threat from COVID-19. Why is this a conversation at all?
So with the original the original variant and then the alpha variant, you're absolutely right. The youngsters were very low risk of contracting COVID, or at least ending up severely unwell with COVID. With the Delta variant, as it stands at the moment, things are different. We've very recently tragically lost a 15-year-old due to COVID who had no previous comorbidities. We have paediatric units are now housing people with COVID. I am seeing more and more patients under the age of 30 with significant illness from COVID that are ended up needing a ventilator. This was not something we saw in the original version. It's not something we even saw in the alpha variant, but this Delta variant is really affecting this younger population. And David, it is much smaller numbers.
I take your point, but it's probably, COVID infections among the young, hospitalisations are not going to be at a level that will threaten the integrity of the NHS. And therefore, I just wonder whether, as a society, we can live with some young people who choose not to be vaccinated getting ill with COVID.
As long as they have all of the information, as long as they are fully accepting of the fact that by choosing not to be vaccinated, they do have an, albeit a very small risk. It's about a 1%, 1 in 100 risk that if they catch COVID, they will end up very, very sick. They've got the fact that if they are vaccinated, it will reduce their risk of long COVID by about 50%. If they have given all of that information and they are happy to take that risk, then actually, I agree. The beauties of our society is that the vaccine is not spreading their transmission. It's not stopping transmission. So as opposed to things like the masks that would stop transmission to our elderly and our vulnerable, the vaccine isn't achieving that. It's all about keeping you safe. And if you don't want to be safe, then we should not mandate that you are made safe, providing they're giving that full information.
Well, Alan Miller, I think David Strain speaks a lot of sense, and I think that's the problem with the psychology of vaccine passports, is it's bullying people into being vaccinated, and it will make those who are slightly hesitant even more hesitant.
Well, I think that's true. And the other thing is, I mean, it shows a real contempt for the process of engaging and winning hearts and minds. Let's remember that 90% of adults have had their first jab and over 80% have had their second. We need to get some context in this. We've also got the issue of no jab, no job, which we're seeing that many are saying they've already had a shortage of care workers, around 12,000. Many are saying that perhaps up to 40,000 may evacuate those positions. It's a really, really problematic issue when you can't convince openly with rational reasoned debate and you make these impositions. That's not the way to do things. And it increases hesitancy on the one hand, and it also creates a situation where you eliminate personal choice, one of the key cornerstones of conscience and freedom. But just also that the Prime Minister has got Plan B. We know that the consultation ends tomorrow. Tomorrow on the 11th is the last day of this so-called consultation, which is very one-sided. All of the options don't provide an opportunity just to say no. They're either a strongly agree or I don't know. We're saying on togetherdeclaration.org, where we've got over 100,000 public signatories, we've got a link to that where we're encouraging people to leave those bits blank and fill out the boxes and have your voices heard. We know in the past when we've had these consultations that has had an impact. And also we're encouraging people to let their MPs know consistently what they think. They can also do that on the togetherdeclaration.org site. And it's really vital that people have their voices heard because local MPs do listen. The government does hear. One of the reasons I believe that they have not moved forward is because of the pressure that they've been put under. But it's also the case that even we've now seen things emerge where there's like the idea of voluntary use of them. And they're utterly unnecessary, right? The whole idea of them, and test to enter as well. They make no rational sense. And increasingly it's about something that would then be in any circumstances, you could be asked to provide the most intimate of your details about procedures. And we never made a deal to do an exchange like this. And it's a real, very, very sad moment. And I think it needs to be challenged in Wales where this has happened. And quite frankly, many times in history, when people have their voices heard enough and the public are engaged, we can turn things around. And that should happen in Scotland too.
Well, I know that your campaign Open for All argues that businesses and jobs will be lost if actually we have COVID vaccine passports at hospitality venues. And that website you just mentioned, for those interested, is togetherdeclaration.org. Last word to you, Joel Williams. Many that are supportive of COVID vaccine passports will argue we're simply trying to save lives. And who could argue with that?
Well, what should concern us all, Mark, is that the Welsh Government refused to rule out how long these medical passports will be in place for. Now, these medical passports negatively affect some of the businesses which have been most harshly hit by the COVID restrictions, such as nightclubs. It's going to be placing a huge burden and extra costs on these businesses, potentially driving them to bankruptcy and financial ruin. Just the sad thing is, Mark, and I have to end with this, in Wales, we've become used to and expect nothing less from a left-wing, anti-business, anti-choice, high-tax, Marx experimenting Welsh Labour government. And in Wales, it's become a bad thing to ask questions. I think asking questions is a great thing. What's wrong with wanting to be informed? What's wrong with wanting to know more? And that's something we definitely need to get back in this country.
And on that, we can all agree. Joel Williams, thank you so much for joining us. Cardiff councillor, Dr. David Strain, senior clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School, and Alan Miller, co-founder of Open for All.